Hey everyone, welcome to another recorded second channel discussion before it actually goes out. But this is a topic I don't think will really change very much anyway, so I want to briefly talk about the second biggest problem in comp Splatoon, because number one is the maps. I mean, the maps are like the number one problem with Splatoon in general, but like, yeah, I mean, we all already know about that topic. Today I want to talk about what, after all this time, I feel is confidently number two in terms of the comp scene in Splatoon. And that is the buffs. Now, look, I know I've ragged on the buffs before. I have been critical of them, but now we've had some time. It's been over 3 years of time. And I want to start by asking a simple question. How many times has a main weapon been overbuffed? I'm not talking about the specials. That happened a decent bit. Jetpack, big radius, Zuka, big radius, etc., right? How many times has a main weapon in this game been overbuffed? Well, in my hands right now is probably prime example number one. S-Blast is a pretty clear winner here, all things considered. Absolutely was buffed to a ridiculous amount. That also took 2.5 years, but it did happen. Besides that, you can make an argument for Pen. Even if I would argue it's mostly cooler, I guess. Pen is still fair as a very strong main weapon. Again, I would say this is mostly the special. I feel the same way about Edit, except I'm not even willing to give Edit any credit. This is absolutely just the special. Edit's a fine main weapon, but it's become only more clear over time that it was overrated, and the nerf that it got was probably not needed. And, like, that's it. That's basically all the weapons that I think have been overbuffed at some point in this game. It's not a very long list. Splatoon 2, this happened constantly. It definitely happened a little bit too much. Maybe a little bit is also being unfair. It definitely happened way too much. But I think we've absolutely encountered the opposite problem. Obviously, there haven't been very many distinct metas. We had the early fake meta, crab meta, jetpack meta, Zuka meta, and then eventually settled into the midline meta. But we've had this midline meta for about 2 years now. And I just want to say, I don't think it's a problem that it's been the same type of meta for so long. Midline meta and double midline meta is an overall good meta, but it still needs to be kept fresh. Let me ask you guys a question. Out of all the main midline fighting weapons, the guns that make up half the team comp right now, that have been the centerpiece of this entire metagame for 2 years, how many of them have actually been really dominant, have been classified as like top tier meta weapons? How many midlines do we have? Slosher, Stamper, and S-Blast right now. Mint is definitely up there, absolutely. And then we have two old top tiers that we don't see as much nowadays, which is Range Blaster and Squeezer. And that's it. Over the course of 2 years, there has been a grand total of 6 weapons. And not all of these have been good at the same time either. That's remarkably few for the centerpiece. When it comes to Tacticooler, it's not exactly much better. The anchor weapon until extremely recently has been almost entirely Pen. Now you'll see a little bit of Rapid and a little bit of E-Liter, but even then that's not very much. As for cooler weapons, it's also pretty rare. If we're being as generous as possible, it's Zap, Try, Pencil, and, what am I forgetting? And Edit Splatling. But that's really about it, being as generous as possible to what is the most important special in the entire game and another centerpiece of the meta. The only role that I feel has done a good job shaking things up lately has been support. Ever since third kits and crab nerfs, there have been an adequate amount of different supportive options with varying playstyles and utility, and there's possibly more underrated options, like this Reflux right here, that could be good. I think support is in a healthy spot right now to where I can see teams running different options and strategies. But this kind of brings me to my second point. Well, the game is overall very diverse, and there's a lot of weapons that can win right now. I wouldn't say there are a lot of weapons at the absolute top. I think this game has an abundance of high tiers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing by any means. A lot of high tiers is quite good. It looks nice if you label it all on a tier list. But when you get to the very upper echelon of teams, you're not going to have very many of them usually, unless they have good synergy with each other. And due to the fact that the main synergies that are important are, well, the midline synergies, typically it's not very common. Usually the best you're going to get is one of the meta midlines paired with one of the other weapons. Obviously, when you go away from the very top level of the game, there's a whole lot of freedom you can have. But when we're watching events and seeing the best teams compete over and over again, and the strategies or comps aren't that different, it's a bit tough. And I've experienced this with my own teams and experiences with Moonlight, for instance. We used to run a lot more off-meta of a comp than we do now. Outside of running E-Leader, we've become a lot more standard with options like Mint and S-Blast, and for the most part, it's been a positive for us. Obviously, we did have some success with Tents, but it's only gotten harsher and harsher to run options like Tent and 96 more recently, and even though it's a drastically different playstyle, we've overall found more success from simply switching. And I don't think that's great. In general, though, I'd still say this factors down to when I see a buff in the patch notes, there's just very rarely an opportunity where I'm like, oh wow, I really need to see how this feels in action, or I'm really motivated to try out a certain weapon again. There's very little changes that I think really gets the comp community to see a real shakeup in the metagame. And again, the meta we have is good, but things still need to change, to evolve, to have new things be thrown in. This doesn't have to be done with content, but typically it's done with buffs. The other way you would do it is, well, via messing with weapon kits, but that's not really something this series does at this point, or really has in the past. So a lot of it falls pretty squarely on the patches to carry some of the heavy lifting and do interesting changes. But instead, we've seen a lot of hesitancy. And I think that's a bit unfortunate. I understand where a lot of this hesitancy comes from. Obviously, Splatoon 2 did way too much with its buffs and nerfs. But while I think it was adequate to tone back how we nerf weapons, and I appreciate it there, buffing is overall something that I think just needed to take a larger priority and become overall more interesting. Even outside of the competitive realm, I think it's really interesting for even more casual players to test out certain changes and ideas being introduced with their weapon. I mean, they're buffs at the end of the day. It's not like it's going to be anything negative. And while that it might be more rare, I've seen that with some examples before. In general, I think it's just something where I really wish they did more with this game's lifespan. Considering where we are at this level of Splatoon 3, I sincerely doubt things are going to change meaningfully in the future. The only super likely patch note we'll see at some point is a nerf to S-Blast given all the solo queue data, but I think all that that'll do is really just serve to have one less meta midline than we already have. I hope I'm wrong, and I really hope we see some interesting patch changes in the future, but as of right now, I think it's been long enough to where this has become a major problem. Even if things were to shift right now, I think a lot of the damage has just already been done. While the meta is good, it is getting very stale. It's not something that really affects me personally. It's never really messed with my motivation or anything. But I do think that overall it still has a negative effect on the average viewer watching top level play or even the average player who wants a bit more of a shakeup. Really, I hope that we're more bold with buffs in the future, especially in Splatoon 4. This is definitely one area where I think we could have used a little bit more chaos. But that's all my thoughts. Thanks for watching.